I'm still sick. So if I've got to stop and cough a little bit, I'm sorry, but I'm still sick. A little bit. Not feeling great. I told Brother Odom that I wouldn't come if I wasn't going to be teaching. In fear of getting somebody else sick. I try to keep my hands clean and stay away from grandma as best I can. Lord willing, we're gonna stick the landing on this. The second thing to note is that I kind of like to do a rundown of what I expect out of this message before I start, so that everybody's on the same page. Maybe save somebody from a little bit of embarrassment, and that somebody being me. I expect this to be kind of a lesson that I do, and then maybe at the end, like I kind of always do, we can talk a little bit about what I'm teaching. If that makes sense. This evening, I'm going to be in Matthew chapter 13, verse 1. And we'll be reading a couple of passages. But before I get started in full, I'm going to go ahead and pray, like I like to do. Lord, I thank you for this day and this time we can come in your presence and we can learn about you. I ask that you bless this message, the service, and this time that we can be in your presence, and that me and my congregation not leave this place the way that they came. That we learn a deeper and better understanding of who you are and how we can use that to make ourselves more like you in pursuit of the perfection that you've promised for us. I ask these things in your name. Amen. Okay, so Matthew chapter 13. If you're there, say amen.
Amen.
You guys were doing it while I was praying. Anyway. Starting in verse 1, that same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and a great crowd gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the bench, on the beach, and he told them many things in parables, saying, the sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. And other seeds fell on the rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up. But since they had no depth of soil, when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among the thorns and the thistles, and they grew up and choked them. And other seeds fell on the good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60-fold, and some 30. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. So this evening I want to discuss this parable. And I've kind of been at a crossroads with it, because for my lifetime I've been taught that the parables are these beautiful little lessons that Christ gives, and he usually has a meaning that he's going to give you, and then you have to go and find more in them, right? That there's this idea of you meditate on this little story until you found more depth. And when I got ready to preach this message, that's what I was going to do. And the more I looked into how these were taught at the time and kind of what they looked like to be interpreted at the time, the less confident I was that was right and true. And what I don't want to do is take Christ's words and misuse them. That's the number one thing I don't want to do, right? So I'm giving you this disclaimer. I have something good to say, and I think the scriptures back up what I have to say. But I'm not certain that this scripture is what that was intended to do. So, if you agree with me, you think that the parables are allowed to be used for interpretation, along with what Christ gives us, then this shouldn't be a problem for you. Don't even worry about it. If you disagree with me, number one, I would love for you to come and tell me that, and tell me why, because I'm not convinced one way or another, and neither are scholars from what I understand, but I'm not one of them, so I can't distinguish between what's right and true, right? I, number one, want you to tell me that. And number two, I want you to walk into this thinking that even though the passage I'm using may not align with what I'm saying to you, what I'm saying can and I will back up with other passages along the way. Okay, that's my disclaimer. I'm going to start with what Christ says about this particular parable. Okay? And he, in verse 13, he gives this parable, and then his disciples come to him afterward. I'm going to sum up what happens in between. His disciples come up after him, and they ask, why do you speak to them in parables? And Christ gives the response of, for you, it is to be known the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. It has been given to you to know. But it's not been given for everyone to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. And at this time, Christ is trying to communicate this new kingdom that he's bringing down on earth to people without riling up the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all of the people opposing him. Because he only has 3 years, and he wants to make sure that he gets all of the training he needs into his disciples and into the crowds and the people that he's talking to before the Pharisees have reason to crucify him. You know, reason. Not they didn't have enough, but they found something. And the reason we know that is because he says stuff like, it's not for everyone to know what I'm doing. But then, at the end of the Gospels, the veil is torn, and understanding is given all. Everyone gets to understand who Christ is. If you seek it out, you will find it. So, he gets done telling them this, and then he tells them what this parable is about. And he says, hear then the parable of the sower. This is verse 18. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what has been sowed along the path. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures it for a while. And when the tribulation or persecution arises on the account of the world, immediately he falls away. As for what was sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of the riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word, understands it, and he indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and another 30. So Christ gives us this explanation of this parable. And he's talking about the kingdom as a whole, right? He's given us this generalized, I'm going to show you a picture of what this kingdom is going to look like. And here's the picture I put. And there are some people, to me, the most common people, the path people, it's going to go out and they're not even going to hear it. They're not going to pay attention to it. It's going to be like water on a duck's back. It's going to flow away from it. And that to me is this people. Right? This is the people. This very lowest rung of people who, but they're going to hear the word and they're not going to consider it. And they're not going to receive it, right? That the seed won't grow because they're not paying attention. That's the majority group of people, I think. And then he gives us the next step up, where you get this rocky ground. And he says, what is sown in the rocky ground is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. These people hear the word and they are listening. And they even receive it. They even get it. And they got something. But it don't take very long. It doesn't take root in their heart. It doesn't really change them in any meaningful way. And when that time of struggle comes, when just any old thing comes along that makes it hard for them to do the will of the Father, they'll stop doing it. Because it's not rooted. There's no roots. And then, and to me, that's this next step. These are the people that, you come to church and they get saved and they're on fire, and then 3 weeks later, the kids are hard to get up in the morning and you can't get into church anymore. And you know, I've got a bad knee and I can't get around so good anymore. Or you know, there's a song that I learned when I was young that goes something like excuses, excuses. You hear them every day. The devil will provide if from church you stay away. In the summer it's too hot, and in the winter it's too cold. You know, it just keeps going on with a whole bunch of these excuses.
Sing, brother, sing.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not gonna sing the whole song. I don't remember the whole song, but it's that. But it's that idea of there's no commitment to this. There's no root. They didn't let the word come into their heart and change them. They let the word come in and it provided them this moment of joy, this cool thing, but it didn't. It didn't stay. And just as soon as that sun raises up the next morning, that little sprout that you've got in your heart, it'll wither and die. And then he goes on into the third person, right? This third person who they hear the word and they accept it and it gets planted, it takes root in their heart. This is important to them. This is something that's going to change them. But when the going gets tough and the devil starts throwing his fiery darts and the world starts putting pressure on them, slowly, 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 that little plant that got planted in good, strong soil gets choked out by the thorns and the thistles of this world. I mean, that's the saddest one to me, because the other two, they didn't really commit themselves. But these people really commit themselves. They really believe in what God has to say. They take the fruit is taken root in them. And yet they can't let go of the concerns of this world. And so eventually, over a long time, sometimes a long time, sometimes not very long, the world will choke out the fire that God put, will choke out the plant that God put there. And then there's that last person. And this to me is the top row. This is the kingdom of heaven. Right there at the top. The kingdom of heaven is like this. Those people who will hear the word and choose to listen to it and choose to commit to it and don't let the surrounding world tear them down, and don't let the devil come between them and God, and they persist in keeping their hearts clean and good, full of good soil. Those people will grow into a fully formed tree, and they'll produce fruit, sometimes 100 others, and sometimes 60, and sometimes 30. And it's interesting that Christ gives us these numbers. He doesn't say that any of these numbers are bad. The thing that you have to do is you have to commit yourself. You have to let the good news of God put root in you, and then you have to stay on top of it. I'm committed every day. God's going to water my plant, and I'm going to keep my heart clean. And I'm going to be committed every day to this. And so this is this overview of the kingdom of heaven that God gives us. He gives us this overview. This is what it's going to look like. Some people are going to hear and go, never changes their life. Never changes. And some people are going to hear it, and it'll change them for a little while, but they won't stay. And then some people will hear it, and it'll change them for a long while. But they'll get distracted, and they'll fall away. But then there will be those guys, those people who hear it, and they commit themselves, and they're going to stick with it, and they'll bear more fruit. Now, I don't have to add anything to this parable for me to think that Christ was a genius. Because as the story goes, there is no simpler story he could have told to convey such an intense understanding. And to the people he's speaking to, it is possible for them to have parsed this, to have meditated on it long enough to have come to this conclusion. And that's what Christ's goal was at the time. But I think that Christ was clever enough to include in his parables more than one way to go about reading. And so I wanted to give you first what Christ had to say, which is excellent and beautiful, and I don't have to add to it. But I'm going to. Not really, but I'm gonna. But I want to give you. He's talking about an overview of the kingdom. He's looking at the big picture, this broad understanding of what the kingdom of heaven is going to look like. And the reason he's doing that is because he's talking to people who don't know what the kingdom of heaven is going to look like. Right? Peter is lost. He don't know it until after Christ dies what the kingdom of heaven is about. And Christ explains it to him. He shows him. Here's what it's about. And Peter doesn't get it until Christ dies. So we're going to go back to the sower. And I'm going to read this again just so that, again, we're on the same page. And the sower went out to sow. And he sowed, some seed fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured it. So first we're talking about the seed that fell in the path. And I want to take that broad view of the kingdom of heaven, and I want to bring it down to one individual. I'm talking to you and your heart. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm talking to you specifically about your heart, and I'm saying to you, now consider that your heart is a garden. And there are some places where your heart, and so he comes and he throws the seed. And so he comes and he throws the seed. And if you aren't willing to hear what God has to say, if you're not willing to listen, then that seed falls on the path. And the devil's going to come and he's going to sweep it away, and you'll have never known that you missed what God had for you. The very first thing you have to do for your own heart is to make sure that you've torn up the path so that it's willing to accept the seed. If God comes and he's got something for you, he's giving you something to work on, to think about, and to implement in your own life, you need to make sure that you're willing to listen. The reason that Christ says over and over and over again in all of his Gospels, he who has ears to hear, let him hear, is because this is the place where we lose most people. Most people aren't listening. If you're talking to somebody, you know, sometimes you're talking to somebody and they look like they're looking you in the eyes and they're looking at and they're not listening. And so you can ask them a question and they don't know. They don't know what you were talking about. That's what Christ wants to avoid. Pastor, you can't make me laugh. You're getting me distracted. Pastor did this something. Anyway, you got to listen. You have to be paying attention. You have to be hearing the word of the Lord. And really considering what he's got to say. It's so easy to hear something and just ignore it. Throw it away. I don't need that. It's so easy to do that. And you do it every day. Everybody does it every day. But when God speaks, or when pastors up there on the pulpit, or there's any number of the teachers that we have in the church standing here, and he says something to you, you need to be listening. Otherwise, you won't catch it. And so we come to the second type of ground, right? Other seed fell on the rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. That means you were listening. You heard it, but it never took root in you. That means God has come along and he's passed out his seed, and he's given to you something that you need to be working towards, right? And you've listened, but you didn't start working towards actually implementing that in your own life. You listen, you heard, you remember it pretty regularly, but you never actually start taking steps to become more like Christ in that way. And I'm being a little vague here, but you can pick I can give you an example. It's going to be, yeah.
Actually, when you were sharing that about where it says when the sun was up, they were scorched, to me, you think about heat. When the heat of trials comes in your life and there is no root or foundation, your faith is not strong at all, and they give up. They just don't think, hey, this is not worth it,
Yeah.
because there is no root when those trials and hard times come.
I can give you examples in my own life. And I will give you. And one of the things that I really hated was that every time I walked into a church, I sometimes would have. When you do, you get odd looks from people. At least that much. And there's been a few times where somebody's come up to me and said, "You need to take your hat off if you're in church." And I went through this whole journey that I'm talking about. And the first step I went through is I wouldn't listen to it. I'm not going to pay any attention to you. I know what's right. I know what's true. I don't have to listen to that. And we got to the second step, and I said to myself, let us go and see what God has to say about this. So I started to explore the Scripture. And in the meantime, there were times where I would be convinced and I wouldn't be convinced. And so there would be days where I wouldn't wear a hat out of principle, and days where I would wear the hat because I know that it's not true. It's just not true. It can't be true. Why would God care about a hat? And so my little bit of obedience to God in that would shrivel up and die. There's just an example. I'll continue with the example as we go through because God has changed my heart on that. And I'm praying for you. This is what happens when you sit in the front row. Anyways. But like Trish said, there's no root. If there's no root, and you've not committed yourself to change, and you've not, every single day I wake up, I'm going to do this better. I'm going to be better. Then that seed that God gives you will shrivel and die. And you'll never accomplish whatever that thing is God's trying to get you to. You'll never get there. And then the third soil. And since they had no, other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. The third soil. These thorns and thistles. Christ calls them the concerns of this world. And see, the first one is about listening. And then the second path, or the second soil, is about doing. And the third path is about being focused. You need to be focused on what you're doing. You need to be consistent and committed, and you need to make sure that once that seed has taken root, and once you're convinced of the truth, that you don't let it go. Because the devil will come and he will try his very best to convince you of other things. He will try his very best to choke out the life of that good fruit that God is growing in. He'll come and he'll attack you by distracting you. He'll attack you by destroying the fundamental thing that you're trying to accomplish. You know, the either the faith or the obedience or whatever thing you're working towards. He'll destroy that little bit that you have. He'll come in and he'll burn up everything around you, if it means choking the life out of that good fruit. And so you have to be vigilant. You have to watch. You have to visit that seed every day and say, what could I have done better today that I didn't do yesterday? How can I be more patient? How can I be more kind? In the scenario of the hat, I had to learn the lesson. First, I'm listening to God. And second, I'm committed to what He has to say. And third, I am convinced that what He says is true. And I'm going to act like it. I'm going to act like it. And I read the book, and I believe, and I hate to believe it, it still hurts to believe it, but that you shouldn't wear hats when prophesying or praying. In general, just when prophesying and praying, you shouldn't wear hats. I don't know why God gave me that, right? But what I am going to do is I'm going to obey. Okay. And one day that section of my heart is going to become it's going to become the good path. Not the good path, the good soil, sorry. And when God reads the scriptures and read and understand the word and the will of God, the scriptures and read and understand the word and the will of God, it's hard for me to just say, okay, God, I'll trust you. I want to go understand. I want to be like Christ. I want to understand it. Right? So God's got to grow a little obedience. And that hurts. And there's something in your heart that God's trying to grow. And you need to be willing to listen. And you need to be willing to commit. And you need to be willing to do it in faith that the fruit is going to come. And you may not know the reason, and you may not understand the purpose and know the timeline, but that's what has to happen. If God's going to make us perfect, make us like Him, that's what we have to do. Now, that's Brother Owen told me 7:30, so I was able to say that's what I had to say on this particular paragraph. I think that no matter which way you cut it, it's good. I mean, it's really good with Christ's words. Mine, I do okay, maybe. I want to compare myself to Christ, but no matter how you take this parable, I think it has something really good to say in either a broad sense or a specific sense. But I think that if you read the Word and you travel along the path Christ travels, you'll see examples of people who they hear Christ, but they're not listening. And then the people who receive the seed, but it doesn't stick. It doesn't stick. And then the people who, like Peter, who hear the word and hear what Christ has to say, and he's convinced of it, but he's wrong. He's thinking something that Christ isn't thinking, right? But once you get it all in line, and you say, God, I'm listening, and I'm going to do what you tell me to, and I'm going to commit to it, then God will bring the fruit. He will bring the increase. And you'll be able to take that fruit, that good thing that God has given you, and you'll be able to give it to someone else. Just like we're supposed to, right? We're supposed to make disciples. How do we make disciples? We give our good fruit to someone else. When the Spirit flows through us, we pass it on. That's what this whole thing's for, right? We're going to reach the world. We want to go out and do. And the way we go out and do is we commit, or we listen, and we commit, and we do, and we give. That's what I have. Does anybody have any comments? Anything to add?
Well, for me, parables is taking everyday, simple, understandable things and teaching a profound spiritual lesson. That's what Jesus was doing in all the parables that he ever spoke. He took the everyday, teachable, knowable, understandable things, but translated them and taught them in such a way as to produce deep spiritual truth. And he brought those out quite well tonight about the deeper spiritual truths about the thorns of the world, no roots. Those things are easy in the world to understand. But you did a good job on sharing the deeper part, which is the spiritual part. I appreciate that.
Our little bitches. We things are really big and kids can get in, our little ditches. These things are really big and kids can get in there and go swimming, and they're not supposed to. Their parents will tell them not to. But most kids at some point do. But the water is a lot of water. It's in your, you get in over your head how much water there is flowing. And he was talking to this guy, and the guy's field was dry. And the sun was beating hot on it. And the water's flowing. And my dad asked him, why are you not pumping the water onto your crop? And the guy said, there are times before the fruit come on that you let it grow a little bit and then you let it dry out. And those roots during that time, when the water isn't plenteous, they'll put more, the plant naturally puts more effort into making a better root base. Now that better root base, when it's time to produce fruit, is able to gather more nutrients quicker and make better fruit. And the fruit, whatever the fruit is going to be better. And so he says, you know, he watches the plants and he's watching them until they become stressed, and then he'll add water as needed. And there is a master gardener who's watching us, and sometimes we don't feel that he's watering us enough or, you know, taking care of us enough, but he's got a plan. And the plan is that we produce the best fruit possible. At home, I've got a garden. I've done a lot of work tilling the thing up and planting some little plants, and then I've taken them and transplanted out there into the garden area. And my dog's running around and knocking things over, and I'm just like, oh, stay out of there. But she don't know better than to get in there, so I've had to replant a few. I've got stuff in there to keep the weeds down, and I'll have to pull weeds, and then there's going to be bugs that are going to attack everything. If I stay on it, it's going to produce some tomatoes and some peppers, and it's going to produce some cucumbers and 2 different kinds of squash. And I'm going to tell you, everything that it's going to produce is going to have seeds in it. Now, it took a seed for me to plant to produce this plant that's going to grow up. And that's the goal, and to get fruit. But it's going to produce seeds. And those seeds, when we share our fruit from our park garden that comes up, it's a lot of work to keep the weeds out. The weeds can get pulled out. In my garden area, I had to pull rocks out when I tilled it up. I had to pull tree roots out. I had to chop some out. I had to get everything out of there. I had to work at it. There was a lot of things in that ground that I didn't want in that ground. It's not going to be beneficial to the plant. Now, there's still weeds. It's amazing how a weed can grow with no attention. I don't have to help the weed at all. It's just going to grow. But things that are good, that are going to produce fruit, seem to take a lot of effort. And in our heart, it's worth the effort, but it takes effort to get things out that shouldn't be there, because there's things that are just naturally there, and they grow easy. Offenses, you mentioned offenses. The thorns that grow up, they're terrible, and they grow abundant. And even when the
Need comes into it, and we share that with other people, you do end up planting the seeds. Because it just takes one example of profound love for someone, for them to go out and say, how do I get to be that love? Just one example of grace. I talked to Pastor about grace Sunday. One example of grace is all it took for me to think to myself, I'm not there. And I have to go and plant that seed and work towards making myself like Christ in that way. Go be more graceful. It just takes one. And if you just get one, and you're even the lowest guy on the totem pole who only makes 30 fruit, that's 30 people who've learned to be more loving, or learn to be more patient and more kind and filled with grace, and whatever else God plants within you, obedient. But if you don't, if you have your seed and you never quite start bearing fruit, it keeps dying from this and that and the other, or you start bearing fruit and then you think you're good on that, and 10 years down the road, your tree is dead because you didn't take the time to maintain what you had. I didn't continue to work towards being wise. I didn't continue to work towards being patient and kind and full of grace. And one day, you won't have the fruit to give. You can't make disciples without first accepting what the Lord has for you. You can't make disciples that way. Because people learn by example. You have to be willing to give people patience if you want patience. You have to be willing to love people if you want to be loved. You've got to be willing to do this. And Christ was willing to do it first for you. And so he gives you this very first seed. Here's the love of Christ given to you for no reason other than I can. Now go and give it to someone else. You may think that. Gave you that. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm going to extract a little bit out of what Danny was talking about earlier. I thought it was, as soon as he said when he was talking about the plants, how sometimes you have to be in a dry season for them to be able to, well, when they get dry, their roots actually get deeper. It's very interesting. It automatically made me think of the Beatitudes when Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God." And it's like sometimes God will lead you through a seemingly dry time. And the reason why he's allowing that is so our roots will get deeper. Because the roots stay shallow if you're always watered. Does that make sense? But if you go through a dry time where it seems like nothing's going on in the church, it seems like everything's normal and I'm not seeing what I think I should see, blah, 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 you know? That's the opportunity for our roots to get down deeper. But guess what? You can't see that on the outside. All you see is the plant. Does that make sense? And the plant getting dry. That's all we see. We don't see the fact that underneath the surface, in the heart, the roots are getting deeper. Does that make sense? And so it just made me think of that. It's like there's a dry time, maybe if there's a dry time.
Dad just fell over in the yard because they didn't have a root system. Dad just fell over in the yard because they didn't have a root system. And so it's very, very important whenever the Lord takes away the water for a while so that we can grow. It's very important. Otherwise, when a storm comes along, we're going to fall on our faces and not know what to do.
I think it's Pastor who told about the trees that get grown in the dome and there's no wind. I looked like 3 Sundays ago, I think he said something like that. But the idea goes that they took these trees and they put them in the ground and they grew them in this place with no wind. And they found that if you grow trees that way, with no wind and nothing to jostle them or change them, they become brittle. Because they don't have the strength, they didn't build up the strength while they were growing to withstand that kind of problem. And so sometimes God's going to bring, he's going to say, you want to be patient? I'm going to send you someone, and they're going to be like wind. they're gonna dry you out. And you're either gonna commit and you're gonna make your roots go deeper and you're gonna drive yourself to be more patient in spite of that. Or that tree will be of no use. It'll break. I didn't even think about it. So you said something about it. That's why I like this. Anybody else?
So during that dry time, when the roots are going deeper, or they should be growing deeper, but we have to cultivate that in our hearts because it's dry. Sometimes it can get dry and it gets stagnant. We get stagnant when it's dry. We think, oh, nothing's happening. So we just sit back and relax, but we got to keep cultivating our heart in order for those roots to continue to go deeper, even if it is a dry season.
Okay, that's what I have. That was my, and I want to talk about it. If no one else has anything, I'm gonna pray. Lord, I thank you for this time we get to come into your presence and we get to learn more about you and about what you have for us. And I ask that this message have been good and useful for us, that we could understand the deeper truths of your kingdom, Lord. I ask that we not leave this place the way we came, that we take this seed that you've given us and plant it in our own hearts and we use it, and one day that it would bear fruit in our lives, and that we could give that to someone else. And I ask these things in your name.
Thank you.